In spite of the notorious poor performance of the British Leyland car firm, one of its few shining aspects was the Leyland Trucks and Buses division, which long predated the part-nationalised conglomerate. Leyland Trucks and Buses had established itself throughout the first half-century of motorised transportation as among the world's most prestigious builders of heavy vehicles, utility trucks and buses, a trait that would carry it through to the present day, though not with its independence. The Leyland Company can trace its history back to 1896, when two men, James Sumner and Henry Spurrier, created the Lancashire Steam Motor Company of Leyland, England, in order to exploit their original product, a 1.5-ton capacity steam van. Sumner had long experience in the building of steam-powered engines for vehicles and bicycles, while Spurrier became an interested party and took a share in what was initially known as J. Sumner Limited in 1895, that had been formed when the Preston Company, Coulthard & Co., purchased a half share. The firm initially specialised in early diesel-powered lawnmowers, while their first vehicular model, a three-wheeler, was powered by a carried-over lawnmower engine. Spurrier, who had spent 8 years with an American railway company, providing valuable experience in the use of steam power. From a factory on Herbert Street, Leyland, the Lancashire Steam Motor Company was formed the following year in 1896 and comprised a workforce of 20 men, creating, by the end of the year, its first steam vehicle, followed by the first passenger-carrying vehicles in 1899. The first Leyland bus model was delivered in 1900 to the Dundee Motor Omnibus Company and proved to be the beginning of a rapid rise in this budding market, as by 1902 the workforce had expanded to 150 men and a new premises was sought at Howe Lane. This was followed by a petrol-engine double-decker bus being exhibited at the 1905 Commercial Motor Show, which initially employed a Crossley engine until a bespoke power unit was completed, though the use of a Crossley engine proved to be one of the reasons why the London and Suburban Omnibus Company procured their first Leyland petrol-engine double-decker buses for the capital. While the firm's name remained officially the Lancashire Steam Motor Company, the Leyland titles were presented on the builders' plates engraved into the chassis of their vehicles, 6 of the new double-deckers being in service in London by the end of 1905, and proved to be so reliable that by 1914, over 100 Leyland vehicles were employed in the city. In 1906, the company unveiled its first bespoke power unit that, in collaboration with Crossley Motors, was improved incrementally so as to iron out various early teething problems, followed in 1907 by the first recorded demonstration bus that was bodied by Milnes Voss and seated 40 on 2 decks, with the upper deck accessed by a forward spiralling staircase that extended over the engine. 1908 saw the Leyland steam van taken to Manchester for the Royal Agricultural Society of England trials for self-propelled vehicles, with the prototype Leyland successfully bringing home the top prize of a silver medal, the victory of this machine at the trial being used to help market their products globally. Bigger and better trucks were soon resultant, that included the first steam bus model and the first ever export order for a steam mail van to the British colony of Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka, the Leyland Motors Limited name being officially adopted from 1907, followed by the outright purchase of Coulthards of Preston during the same year. In 1912, the War Office held trials to determine which vehicles would qualify for a war subsidy, the owners of which would be eligible to receive a premium of £50 on the purchase price of each vehicle, and an annual subsidy for 3 years of £20 should their product qualify. The requirement to the builders were that each vehicle was to be maintained in good order and be available for purchase at 72 hours' notice in the event of war at current market value plus 25%, these vehicles being arranged into 2 classes, a 30 hundredweight and a 3-ton, Leyland vehicles being the only ones capable of gaining certificates in both classes, and thereby resulted in an order from the War Office for 88 chassis that proved to be a great boost for sales and reputation. The rise of petrol-engine vehicles meant that demand for steam vehicles was now slowly falling, and the manufacture of these products was transferred to a small factory in the nearby town of Chorley, while a new Leyland production plant for their mainstream models was established in 1913 at Farrington, just north of Leyland town, adjacent to the West Coast Main Line, that allowed for an increased volume of work, with over 1,500 employed and over 2,000 vehicles produced in the decade leading up to the outbreak of World War I in 1914. With the onset of the conflict, all civilian vehicle assembly ceased, and in 1915 the entire production of 6,000 lorries was allocated to the Royal Flying Corps, which would later become the Royal Air Force or RAF in 1918. Following the end of the war during the same year, and with the resumption of non-military vehicle production, by 1925 Leyland was producing 40 different models, including the M1 and O1 of 1919, which both used the Leyland 36 to 40 horsepower engine and could accommodate 28 and 33 passengers respectively. The G range, meanwhile, including the G1 to G8, was introduced in the same year and reconfigured a wartime RAF chassis and 36 to 40 horsepower engine for use in civilian circles. At the same time, despite the rise of legislation in 1920 to strictly limit the size of vehicles due to the constraints of the archaic road network, this only served to drive further innovation as to overcoming this dimensional obstacle. Leyland, in order to maximize the space within these limits, moving the driver alongside the engine instead of over it, creating the side type of 1922 that was officially marketed as the SG range. Alongside its truck and bus building enterprise, Leyland Motors also briefly stepped into the realm of luxury cars so as to counter the likes of Rolls-Royce and Daimler, 1920 seeing the release of the Leyland 8, which was launched at that year's London Car Show as the most expensive car on sale in the UK, costing £2,700 for a 5-seater Tourer, or £99,100 in 2023. However, this expense, in a period of post-war austerity, led ultimately to only 8 examples ever being built, with chief engineer and later holder of the world land speed record, John Parry Thomas, testing each one to a speed of 100 miles an hour before delivery to their respective owners. The Leyland Company's failure to win over the regular car market was countered by the continued glowing success of their truck and bus division, releasing the Leyland LB or London Bus as a means of breaking the monopoly held by the Associated Equipment Company or AEC with the London General Company, by this time the largest of London's bus operators. The LB was mechanically similar to the G7 and sold well among independent operators in the capital, which rose up rapidly to compete with London General. By 1926, the design philosophy of Leyland Motors was to have a common chassis design shared between both bus and lorry models, though this changed towards the end of that year when the PLSC3 Lion was introduced as part of the Leviathan reign of forward-control buses with a 4-cylinder side-valve engine. The Lion was an exceptionally flexible single-decker model that incorporated front and rear loading doors and a stylish aesthetic that was highly popular among bus operators, with 16 LSC1 Lion chassis being supplied to English Electric in 1928 without engines or gearboxes for use as trolleybuses for the Bradford Corporation. 1927 would see the release of the Titan double-deck and Tiger single-deck chassis, with the Titan TD1 being only 13 feet high and, in combination with its aluminium paneling, weighed in at a meager 5.5 tons, thus making it compatible with pneumatic tires, both the Tiger and Titan being highly popular machines due to their lightweight build and incredible practicality. Going into the 1930s, Leyland entered the category of electric vehicles with the provision of the Leyland TB or trolleybus of 1932, a series of 2- and 3-axle machines, dubbed the TB and TTB respectively, that became one of the first ranges of custom trolleybuses offered, as opposed to the more common practice of converting standard petrol and diesel-engined buses as per the earlier English electric models. The Leyland TB would find work with multiple trolleybus companies, including Glasgow Corporation Transport, Hull Corporation Transport, Lancashire United, and various systems in New Zealand, including Auckland, Dunedin, Wellington, and New Plymouth. Further innovation came in 1933 with the first Leyland diesel engine for passenger vehicles that was exhibited at that year's Commercial Motor Show and was available for all models in the Leyland range, followed in 1934 by an all-metal bodywork being offered as an option to customers that provided a more robust and longer-lasting frame than the more traditional timber-framed bodywork. For 1935, the Leyland Cheetah, based on a new lightweight chassis, was introduced alongside the Titan TD4 and an improved version of the Tiger dubbed the TS7, followed in 1937 by the delivery of 100 TD4s to the London Passenger Transport Board as the STD class, and proved to be Leyland's first large-scale London order since the early part of the century. Gaining a reputation for silence and operational smoothness, this led to the cooperation of both parties in a prototype Tiger designated the FEC, which, after undergoing proving trials, saw 87 units enter service from 1939. More unusual, though, was the 1937 launch of the Leyland GNU, a 3-axle machine unveiled at that year's Commercial Motor Show that was capable for use as both a bus and a truck. The GNU featuring four-wheel steering at the front that was predicated on the belief that this would reduce the tire scrub problems on conventional six-wheeled vehicles, and was considered to have comparatively light steering, though in the end, the design proved to be not popular with customers, and only 8 were ever built. In 1938, Leyland once again entered discussions with London Transport as to developing a rear-engined version of their earlier Leyland Cub, the prototype of which was assembled jointly between London Transport themselves and Leyland Motors. Successive trials undertaken with the vehicle, leading to an order for 59 units, though only 48 were ever delivered due to the onset of World War II. 1941 would see plans announced for the Titan TD8 as a whole-scale improvement to the Titan range, but this scheme had to be shelved due to the government restricting the construction of non-military vehicles, though the Ministry of Supply allowed Leyland to build as many buses as possible from components which had already been assembled, with 196 TD7s and 22 TS11s being built during the war. The main employ of Leyland during World War II was the construction of the Cromwell and Centurion tanks from 1943, the former of which saw action at the Battle of Normandy following the successful D-Day invasion. The resumption of bus assembly would not take place until late 1945, and even then, full production capacity was not reached until mid-1946, priority being given to double-deck chassis due to the pressing demand from operators for maximum capacity vehicles. With the implementation of steel rations during the post-war era, Leyland Motors was able to maintain a steady income thanks to the demand for refurbishing older petrol buses to diesel power so as to meet the fuel restrictions being placed on the British population. Leyland offering the in-house conversion for pre-war vehicles, usually employing the Leyland 7.4-litre oil engine that neatly fit within the chassis and frame of older buses. In 1948, London Transport, aware that AEC alone would not be able to cope with the post-war demand for buses by the capital, placed an order for 2,135 Leyland Titans, of which 500 would be the 8-foot wide version for added capacity, though in the face of width restrictions being placed on certain routes by the traffic commissioners, the 8-foot models proved to be not terribly popular and were outsold heavily by the narrower variants. In 1950, changes to the British construction and use of vehicle regulations ultimately permitted all public service vehicles to be 8-foot wide, irrespective of the route, and, at the time, the maximum length of double-deck vehicles was increased to 27 foot, Leyland responding through slight modifications to the Titan, which included an increase in the wheelbase to 16 foot 5 inches. 1950 also saw the release of the long-delayed Leyland Olympic, which incorporated a revolutionary underfloor engine, the advantages of which included increased seating capacity in a given chassis length, much improved entry and exit, better weight distribution, and easier access to mechanical parts, thus saving maintenance costs. Furthermore, Leyland would partner with Metro Camel Wayman to construct the new vehicle, though due to the conventional mindset of many bus operators, who weren't endeared to the integral or chassis-less construction that replaced the traditional chassis and bodywork with a strengthened frame, the Olympic was not a popular buy when first launched. However, the single-deck Leyland Royal Tiger, as released alongside the Olympic, proved to be an instant hit, with hundreds sold on the export market, primarily to the colonies of the British Empire. With Leyland going from strength to strength, the firm purchased Albion Motors Limited of Glasgow in 1951, removing a once strong competitor and resulting in a large-scale pruning of the Albion range, where its models overlapped with Leyland's own products, the only Albion bus still on sale after 1953 being the Albion Victor. This was followed by the takeover of the Watford-based Scammell lorries in 1955, which specialized in the construction of oversized or purpose-specific lorries and vehicles across a wide range of applications, both civilian and military, Scammell being allowed to trade under its own name, despite it being a subsidiary of the ever-expanding Leyland Motors Group. From July 1, 1956, amendments to the construction and use regulations saw the maximum allowable length for double-deckers increased to 30 foot, with Leyland responding through one of its most famous designs, the Atlantean prototype of that year, which was capable of hosting 75 seats, although several drawbacks prevented the bus being placed on the market. Chief among these was the amount of noise in the lower saloon, caused by the positioning of the engine inside the body in order to allow for bench seating of up to 5 additional passengers, Leyland, by 1958, being able to iron out the flaws of the Atlantean, and the production variant entered service with Glasgow Corporation during the same year. In 1960, Leyland, amidst its continued success on the truck and bus market, returned to the realm of mass-production car building through its acquisition of the Standard Triumph International Holding Company of Canley, Standard Triumph having been formed through the purchase of the bankrupt Triumph Company in November 1944 by Standard Motors, and ultimately led to a fair mixture of affordable, high-performance sports cars and roadsters from Triumph alongside family cars and tractors from Standard. However, a series of financial woes throughout the 1950s, especially with the Triumph division, together with the rise of various competing economy cars that provided far more modern underpinnings than Standard's primary small family car, the Standard 8, meant by the end of the decade, Standard Triumph International was in a very vulnerable position and thus ripe for takeover. Leyland Motors stepped in during December 1960 and purchased the entire firm for £20 million. The forward strategy for their new acquisition being the marketing of Triumph due to it being a more striking and recognizable brand when compared to Standard, with the last Standard product, the Standard Vanguard, remaining in production until May 1963, when it was replaced by the Triumph 2000. Now dubbed the Leyland Group, the acquisition of Triumph made the firm the second largest car builder in Britain, behind the British Motor Corporation or BMC, the expansionist ideals of the company being further encouraged following the rise of the highly ambitious Donald Stokes as chairman of Leyland Motors Limited in September 1962. Stokes immediately set about purchasing as many companies as possible so as to increase the influence of his corporate empire, starting during the same year of his rise to the position of chairman with the takeover of Associated Commercial Vehicles or ACV, which incorporated longtime rival AEC, Thornycroft, Park Royal Vehicles, and Charles H. Rowe. In 1965, a 25% minority share was purchased in Bristol Commercial Vehicles and Eastern Coachworks, while 1966 saw perhaps its most famous acquisition in the form of Rover Cars, one of Britain's most prestigious marques for luxury and executive models, as well as being a major innovator with gas turbine-powered models. The incorporation of Rover also brought with it their subsidiary car, aero-engine and armoured fighting vehicle manufacturer, the Alvis Car and Engineering Company, thereby making the Leyland Group the undisputed second-largest car firm in the UK and a force to truly be reckoned with, controlling 16% of the UK car market and having a near monopoly on the construction of trucks, buses and other heavy vehicles. In the wake of buying the Aveling-Barford Company, a major manufacturer of road rollers and dump trucks during 1967, it became quickly apparent to Stokes that the rival BMC was on the brink of fiscal collapse, and therefore within perfect scope to be acquired so as to make a corporate monolith in the global motoring world. This sentiment was shared by the government of Prime Minister Harold Wilson and the then Minister of Technology Tony Benn, who considered that, rather than allowing BMC, as Britain's largest car company, to fail, a merger would be encouraged between BMC and the Leyland Group, motivated primarily by the complementing of BMC's low-end family cars, luxury saloons and sports cars, by the Leyland Group's plentiful supply of mid-range or executive models through its Triumph and Rover divisions. This led, in 1968, to the merger of the two firms to form the British Leyland Motor Corporation, the fifth largest car company in the world, and one that was rife with such corporate inefficiencies, union strife, internal competition, and a lack of market-beating models, that within a few years the highly profitable Leyland Group's input had been squandered, and all brands involved were facing bankruptcy. However, while the mass-production car division was foundering, the trucks and buses sector continued to thrive, starting with the announcement of July 1969 that a joint venture with the newly formed state-owned bus operator, the National Bus Company, will create an optimized series of bus and coach models going into the 1970s. This led to the establishment of the Leyland National Company from a brand new plant in Workington, Cumbria, with its first model, the Leyland National Single-Decker Bus, being unveiled at the 1970 Commercial Motor Show, an extremely flexible, robust and stylish machine that, following an extensive proving program, saw the first production units delivered to the Selneck TPE of the Manchester area during 1972, while pre-production examples were taken on by Cumberland Motor Services. The National would see huge sales success across Britain and the world, with some of its more notable export orders, including a contingent of 450 examples, being sent to Caracas in Venezuela, while 125 were ordered by the Jamaica Omnibus Service of Kingston, Jamaica, and 40 to the National Bus Company of Trinidad and Tobago, 3,500 examples having been sold by the time the Phase 2 Leyland National was released in April 1976. Sadly, while the trucks and buses sector, with its incredibly successful Leyland National, was one of the few bright sparks of the British Leyland Group. Whatever profits this division made were expended keeping the ailing aspects of the wider firm afloat, the income from the Leyland National being dwarfed by the cumulative losses of the mass production car divisions, as they refused to work efficiently or develop a sustainable forward planning strategy. This led to the effective bankruptcy of British Leyland in December 1974, followed by part nationalisation of the company during 1975. The Ryder Report, as drafted so as to develop a future for the company, considering that the British Leyland Empire should be broken up into 4 divisions, the lorry and bus assets being parted out to the Leyland Bus and Truck Division. With the formation of the Bus and Truck Division, a greater degree of autonomy was allowed for their activities, while due to their position as among the more profitable parts of the wider British Leyland firm, this division was rewarded with a larger share of the new investment programme, with studies of likely future vehicle requirements both domestically and on the export market being undertaken. These illustrated that the previous convention of creating large numbers of models to serve individual workloads could now be undertaken by a small number of much more flexible designs, meaning widespread rationalization could be administered. At the same time, a new project, dubbed B15, was underway to deliver a wide range of standard bus platforms, though in the end only a single version was created due to cost constraints, this being released as a revival of the classic Titan name during 1977. This was followed by the development of a new double-deck chassis, codenamed B45, that was unveiled at the 1980 Commercial Motor Show under the name Olympian, its purpose being to replace the Atlantean, while putting up a stiff fight with the Daimler Fleet Line and Bristol VRT, with initial orders proving to be encouraging. In 1980, under the government of newly elected Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, her preference for open competition and an attitude of survival of the fittest led to the passing of the 1980 Transport Act, which allowed journeys over 30 miles to be open to competition, leading to an exponential rise in new bus companies that provided low-cost alternatives to the established giants and brought about a sweeping change to the market for bus travel. This was compounded further by the reduction of single-operator bus company subsidies from 50% during 1980 by 10% for each successive year until the subsidy disappeared completely, meaning startup operators would have to persevere on their own merits or go bankrupt. This led to a widespread cost-cutting exercise among both low-cost and established bus operators that eschewed brand-new buses produced by British Leyland in favour of second-hand Atlanteans, VRTs and Fleet Lines, the Leyland Bus and Truck Division surviving primarily through long-term contracts with major bus companies such as London Transport. In March 1981, under the sweeping corporate reforms of British Leyland chairman Sir Michael Edwards, the passenger vehicle division was renamed Leyland Bus and given even more autonomy, though officially it remained under the auspices of Leyland Vehicles Limited. Sales output for that year seeing 100 examples of the new Leyland Tiger bus in service, with a substantial number still on order for 1982. By 1984, the Olympian was able to strengthen its grip on the dwindling British double-deck bus market, and by 1985 was Leyland's only double-deck chassis still in production. The depression of the home market under the 1980 Transport Act, seeing Leyland's losses climb to around £80 million in the 3 years between 1982 and 1984, with 1985 seeing jobs slashed at the firm so as to reduce overhead. The Olympian, therefore, was largely responsible for keeping Leyland going as it continued to rack up sustained orders, with the 1984 to 1985 fiscal year seeing over 500 units purchased by companies both domestically and internationally. Such was the success of the Olympian that by the mid-1980s, these vehicles were in regular use with bus operators all across the globe, including 19 units operated in Athens, 175 examples in use with Dublin Bus of Ireland, and 400 Olympians finding work with Singapore bus services. The British colony of Hong Kong was a major user of Leyland buses, originally with the Leyland Victory, but from 1981 saw 906 Leyland Olympians procured by Kowloon Motorbus, all but 4 of which were outshopped with Alexander Coachwork. Other operators of Leyland Olympians in Hong Kong included China Motorbus, which purchased 37 units between 1981 and 1993, and Citybus, who operated 294 examples, the Citybus units being made up of a mixture of 2- and 3-axle configurations, and would remain a fixture of the Hong Kong bus scene until 2015, when changing emissions regulations saw them withdrawn, Citybus number 391 being the last Leyland Olympian to ever run in Hong Kong. Furthermore, The Leyland Olympian was a major player for sightseeing tours, particularly in the United States, with 10 Eastern Coachworks-bodied 3-axle open-top examples initially being procured by Grosvenor Coach Lines of San Francisco, though later models were transferred to New York, Seattle, and Los Angeles. In 1985, a further Transport Act was passed, which deregulated the bus services outside London, thus enabling existing and new companies to operate in others' regions without lengthy debate at the Commissioner's office, thus leading to a near-complete collapse of the domestic bus market, as established firms were undercut by low-cost startups that worked on extremely narrow profit margins. The Act also proposed that the government-owned National Bus Company be split and sold as private firms, with limits on how many could be bought by one group, bus sales for British Leyland slumping, with only 44 and 57 brand-new Leyland Nationals being registered for 1984 and 1985 respectively. This was primarily caused by the in-house management teams, who hoped to buy the company cheaper with old buses, while not wishing to invest in new vehicles, for fear of having to sell them on at a loss. Some of the new operators, with their limited capital, buying up second-hand buses in their droves and reintroducing conductors to speed up services, while the minibus and hopper emerged as a means of replacing full-size vehicles on suburban and low-demand regional runs. Faced with the prospect of a total collapse in new bus sales, British Leyland had long experimented in diversifying their craft through the creation of alternative transport means, their most notable venture being the conversion of the Leyland National Bus for use on the railways in the form of the Pacer, which first emerged in the mid-1970s as a series of prototypes that were direct translations of the National Bus frame placed upon the chassis of redundant freight vehicles. This was later evolved into more dedicated rail vehicles, initially in the form of a prototype during 1979 dubbed the Class 140, which was assembled at the BR Works of Derby Litchurch Lane and saw work primarily in South Wales and along the border routes to Hereford and Shrewsbury. While the Class 140 was not praised for its ride comfort on jointed track and noise levels, the ability for the unit to be assembled and operated at half the cost of a fully developed train gave British Rail the incentive to put the machine into mass production, spurred on further by the fact that, for 1982, passenger numbers on the UK railway network had dropped to their lowest levels on record. 4 production versions subsequently emerged, the first of which was the Class 141, which was essentially a Class 140 with a different cab design, 20 of these units being constructed at Derby for the West Yorkshire Passenger Transport Executive, and would ply their trade on commuter services from Leeds to Huddersfield, Sheffield, Hull, Pontefract, Bradford and York. 1985 saw the release of the Class 142, of which 96 examples would be produced, and generally followed the same pattern as the Class 141, but with a revised body shell design, being wider than its predecessor to allow for better seating capacity, the Class 142 being the most widespread of the Pacer family, and would see work across nearly every part of the UK rail network with the exception of London and Scotland. The Class 143 and 144 also followed in 1985 as the last examples of the Pacer family, and saw the most radical changes to their external appearance through bodywork provided by Walter Alexander Coach Builders of Falkirk, the Class 143 being originally put to work in the Newcastle area before eventually migrating to South Wales and southwest England. The Class 144, meanwhile, differed from the Class 143s by way of their underframes being the product of British Rail Engineering Limited rather than Andrew Barclay, and also saw 10 examples fitted with a centre trailer for additional capacity, the Class 144s being exclusively used in the West Yorkshire region and were put to work on trains out of Leeds to Halifax, Huddersfield, Lancaster via Hellifield, Harrogate, York and Manchester Victoria. The Pacers would gain a notorious reputation for their lack of build quality and ride comfort, though despite their generally negative reception by passengers, the machines proved to be highly reliable and economic alternatives to dedicated multiple units, and would ply their trade across the UK network until final withdrawal in May 2021. In 1985, so as to maintain a consistent workload for its staff at the former Leyland National plant at Workington, British Leyland successfully won the bid to construct a new batch of Class 155 Sprinter units that would provide a more upmarket alternative to the earlier Class 150 sets on long-distance regional railways services. The Class 155s would eventually be unveiled between 1987 and 1988, with 42 units built, and despite early teething problems regarding the engines and transmissions, as well as a pervasive issue with the automatic doors, these trains would become popular machines across many regions of the British Rail network, although all but 7 of these trains would be split into single-car Class 153s during the early 1990s. In 1986, the Leyland National was replaced by the Lynx, a thoroughly modern design for the latter half of the decade, but one plagued by corrosion and build quality concerns that killed its sales potential in the same manner as the National. And while this model would form the backbone of many notable bus operators across the UK, attempts to sell the Lynx on the export market, with demonstrator units dispatched to Australia and Singapore, failed to materialise. During the same year, as part of the privatisation of British Leyland under the Thatcher government, Leyland Trucks was purchased by the Dutch lorry builder, DAF, to form Leyland DAF from February 1987, the Leyland Trucks buyout also including the Freight Rover division, which brought with it the commercially successful Leyland Sherpa van and the enlarged Freight Rover 300 series. The Leyland mark would be retained so as to keep up recognition on the market among long-time and generally loyal customers, with vehicles being outshopped wearing the brand Leyland DAF, this situation continuing until February 1993, when the DAF Trucks Holding Company, DAF NV, was placed into administration following a downturn in goods vehicle sales in the wake of the 1992 global economic recession. During the breakup of DAF NV, 4 of its former divisions would be bought out by various management figures, with what had previously been Freight Rover under British Leyland being turned into an independent company dubbed Leyland DAF Vans, or the LDV Group of Washwood Heath, Birmingham, and will continue to trade until 2009. For the Leyland DAF Trucks division, this was purchased by elements of the DAF NV management based in Leyland itself to create Leyland Trucks from 1996, working as an independent manufacturer under the Leyland DAF brand until 1998, at which point PACCAR, an American multinational based in Seattle, Washington, acquired the company. Under PACCAR, the Leyland DAF brand would survive until 2002, after which the Leyland element was dropped, and all products of the Leyland factory are now marketed under the DAF title, although officially the company remains as Leyland Trucks and today employs 1,100 people, producing 6 individual models, with a record assembly rate of 24,700 vehicles being achieved in 2008 and representing 27.3% of the UK market for goods vehicles. For Leyland Bus, this was sold on January 13, 1987, to a consortium of management and banks, a major boost to the company as it gave the impression that, under private ownership, the firm will be allowed investment far greater than what was experienced under part-nationalisation, with Ulster Bus, as a sign of confidence, placing an order for 195 Tigers just 1 month later. This enthusiasm rapidly wore off, though, and by the end of the year, following a full reappraisal of Leyland's position on the ever-dwindling bus market, the company directors found there was too much doubt as to the firm's future, and after 13 months of independence, Leyland Bus was sold in March 1988 to Volvo. Under Volvo management, the Swedish builder quickly addressed the poor-selling vehicles, such as the Tiger, by removing them from sales, with new production methods being adopted to raise the quality and shrink operating costs. At the same time, Leyland also started producing the Volvo B10M chassis to a level of quality that sometimes bettered the Swedish examples, although this early buzz was quickly replaced by scandal based on matters relating to the previous management's practices prior to the Volvo buyout. During 1987, in order to ensure an interest in purchasing the company by Volvo, the Leyland Bus management had built up a sizable number of chassis which had been put down on paper as sold units, when in reality they were stock chassis based on forecasted sales that failed to materialize. This, coupled with a multi-million-pound re-engineering program to fix the problematic Class 155 engines and transmissions, meant Leyland Bus was heavily in debt and teetering on bankruptcy when Volvo purchased the firm, with the Swedish builder reluctantly footing the bill in exchange for dismissing the existing management team, with Leyland Bus being renamed to VL Bus Limited. To balance the books, Volvo closed the Golden Hill Lane chassis plant in Leyland and concentrated all activities, including chassis and bodywork construction, at the Workington plant, which had initially been constructed solely for the production of the Leyland National Bus. Furthermore, the poor-selling Leyland Swift minibus, which had been based on the underpinnings of the Roadrunner truck, was axed, and plans to export the Lynx as a chassis for local bodybuilding using Volvo's global network were also shelved, the new parent firm ensuring that every action was closely scrutinized for viability and cost-cutting, with parts prices being raised to generate extra income. As the recession bit harder, the decision was taken in late 1991 that Leyland was to be wound down and closed, the Tiger coach chassis, alongside the Lynx, being discontinued in 1992, leaving only the Olympian as the sole chassis produced. The announcement that what was formerly Leyland Bus would be axed came as a shock to loyal customers and the local government of Western Cumbria, the Workington plant being one of the main employers of an area rife with economic deprivation, though attempts to have Volvo renounce this decision, together with sympathetic Olympian orders from UK bus operators, fell on deaf ears. Once the final orders were completed, with the last bus constructed being Singapore Bus Service 3-axle Olympian SBS 9168S, the Workington plant was closed in July 1993, while Volvo continued to produce the Olympian in Irvine, Scotland, in a heavily revised form, with only the raw chassis sharing a common thread on a bus now badged as a Volvo. The Volvo Olympian would remain in production until 2000, after which it was succeeded by the 2-axle Volvo B7TL double-decker, although the Olympian name would continue with the 3-axle Volvo Super Olympian of 1998, which was built at Irvine until that plant closed in mid-2000, whereupon production was moved to Poland. In the end, the near-century-long legacy of Leyland Trucks and Buses was one of both incredible success and dismal failure, its peak being during the pre-war and post-war era, as the firm came to dominate the market for both heavy goods vehicles and bus transportation, not just in Britain but across the world. However, while the Trucks and Buses division could weather the storm of British Leyland, the contraction of the bus market during the 1980s deregulation was a crippling blow that robbed the builder of its primary marketplace, which, in combination with a slew of poor management decisions, warranty claims, and the need to rework the engine faults of the Class 155, meant not even the capital of the Swedish giant Volvo could salvage the firm. Nevertheless, Leyland continues to live on today through its trucks division, which remains as one of the most prominent builders of heavy goods vehicles in the world, regardless of the fact that its products are marketed under a different brand. Investment from America and a strong customer base, meaning Leyland Trucks can now develop a new model range to face the challenges of an ever-changing marketplace.